I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would end up telling a story like this. I wasn't into ghost stuff, creepypastas, or late-night horror videos. I was just a regular guy living alone in a small rental house in the Midwest. Quiet, neighborhood, cheap rent, boring life. Nothing about it screamed haunted or dangerous, it was just normal. But that was before I noticed the man under the streetlight. It started one night in early October 2020. I had just gotten back from a long evening shift. My driveway was on the side of the house, but from where I parked I could see the street lamp at the corner. It wasn't a bright lamp, more of a dull, flickering orange glow. But that night it was working just fine. And under it, there was a man. At first I didn't think much of it. People pass through neighborhoods all the time, right? He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hooded sweatshirt. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, head tilted slightly down. He didn't move. When I pulled in, he didn't even glance my way, but when I got out of my car and walked to the door, I felt him watching me. You know that prickly sensation like invisible eyes burning into the back of your head? That's what it was. I hurried inside and locked up. Told myself it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing, because the next night, he was there again. Same spot, same posture, just standing under that dull orange lamp. And the night after that. The third night, I decided to test him. I parked, got out, and stood on my porch instead of going inside. I stared right back at him. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood. I swear the seconds stretched into minutes. My heart was hammering in my chest. Finally, I shook my head, muttered something under my breath, and went inside. Locked the door, closed the blinds. But even as I sat on the couch, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still staring. The first real scare happened a week later. I had just fallen asleep when a noise yanked me awake. Tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it was coming from my dream, but then it came again, clearer this time. Tap, tap, tap on the front window. I sat up, heart slamming against my ribs. The blinds were closed, but I knew someone was right on the other side. Slowly I reached over, grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed, and crept into the living room. I pulled the blind just a sliver, and there he was. The man from the streetlight, standing on my porch. His hood was up, face hidden in shadow, but I could see the glint of his eyes. He was leaning forward slightly, one hand lifted, fingertip pressed to the glass. I dropped the blind and stumbled back. My hands were shaking, so badly I almost dropped my phone when I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, too calm. "Stay inside, sir. Officers are on the way." I crouched in the hallway, every muscle tight with fear, bat clutched to my chest. I expected pounding on the door, breaking glass, something. But by the time the cops arrived, the porch was empty. They searched around the house, found nothing. No footprints, no forced entry, no evidence at all. One of the officers, a stocky guy with a mustache, actually chuckled. "Halloween season. Probably some kid messing with you." I wanted to scream at him. That was no kid. That was a grown man. But they left, and I was alone again. After that, things got worse. He didn't stay under the streetlight anymore. He moved closer. Sometimes I'd look out the back window and see him standing at the edge of my yard, barely visible between the trees. Other times I'd hear footsteps crunching on the gravel by the side of the house, but when I looked, nothing. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke to the sound of my back door handle rattling. Soft at first, then harder, like someone testing it. I called the cops again. This time they arrived quicker, but same story. Nothing there. They even implied I was imagining things. That phrase burned into me. Imagining things. The breaking point came on a Wednesday night. I'll never forget it. I was lying in bed, scrolling my phone, trying to distract myself. Then the power went out. Everything went dark. I froze. Phone screen, the only light in the room, and then, through the silence, came the sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate, heavy, coming from the living room. I held my breath, straining to listen. Another step. Closer. The floorboards creaked under the weight. I gripped the bat, heart pounding, and dialed 911 with my other hand. The operator answered. I whispered, "Someone's inside my house." I could barely get the words out. Then, just as I said it, the footsteps stopped. The line was silent except for my breathing. Then the operator said, "Officers are on the way. Stay where you are." I stayed frozen, back pressed against the headboard, bat raised. Minutes dragged by like hours. When the officers finally arrived and swept the house, they found nothing again. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. But I knew what I heard. I knew someone had been inside. The next day I installed security cameras, one for the front door, one for the backyard. That night I stayed awake, watching the live feed on my phone. At 2:41 a.m., the backyard camera triggered. The man was there. But this time he wasn't standing still. He was crawling, on all fours, slowly, across the yard. His hood had fallen back. His face was pale, stretched into a grin so wide it didn't look human. His eyes glowed faintly in the infrared camera light. I screamed and dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so hard it nearly slipped again when I called the cops. They came, they looked, and of course, nothing. I showed them the footage. They watched silently. Finally, one of the officers said, "Could be a glitch. Infrared plays tricks on faces sometimes." I wanted to hit him. A glitch? A glitch doesn't crawl across your yard and grin at the camera. But again, they left. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grin. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and drove to a cheap motel on the other side of town. I didn't even care about the money. I just needed to get away. But when I pulled into the motel parking lot and stepped out of my car, I froze. At the far end of the lot, under the flickering streetlight, he was there, same hoodie. Same posture, just standing, watching. That was the night I realized the truth. It didn't matter where I went. The man wasn't tied to the house or the neighborhood, or even the cameras. He was tied to me. I don't know how. I don't know why. But I know he's still out there. Because even now, years later, I still see him. Sometimes in the corner of my eye when I'm driving home late. Sometimes in the reflection of a dark window. Sometimes in my dreams. Always the same. Standing under a streetlight. Watching. And the police, they can't help, they never could. Because how do you arrest something that isn't supposed to exist? I moved into apartment 6B in the spring of 2018. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom in an old brick building that had clearly seen better decades. The hallways smelled faintly of mildew, the elevators creaked, and the walls were thin enough that you could sometimes hear your neighbors arguing or blasting music, but it was cheap. And at 25, living alone for the first time, cheap was good enough. The first month was uneventful. I got used to the quirks of the place, the pipes that rattled at night, the way the radiator hissed when it kicked on, the groaning of the building settling into itself. Every old building has noises, but then I started noticing the voices. It was subtle at first. Late at night, lying in bed, I'd hear muffled talking through the wall. Not unusual in an apartment building. But what was strange was that the apartment next to mine, 6A, was vacant. The landlord had told me when I moved in. The tenant had moved out unexpectedly, and they hadn't filled it yet. So why did I hear voices? I brushed it off the first few times. Maybe it was drifting up from the street or down from another floor. Sound carries weirdly in old buildings. But one night around 2 a.m., I woke to a clear whisper right against the wall by my bed. "Can you hear me?" I shot upright, heart pounding. It wasn't muffled. It wasn't distant. It was like someone had pressed their mouth right to the other side of the wall. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just sat there in the dark, every nerve in my body on fire. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be a dream. I lay back down, pulled the covers up to my chin, and waited for morning. The next day I asked the landlord if anyone had moved into 6A. He shook his head. Nope, still empty. Why? I didn't tell him. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But that night, it happened again. I know you can hear me. The voice was soft, raspy, right against the wall. This time, I whispered back before I could stop myself. Who are you? There was a long pause, then, I'm in the walls. The next morning I called the police. I told them someone might be squatting in the vacant unit. 2 officers came by, polite but skeptical. They had the landlord unlock 6A. The place was empty. No furniture, no clothes, no signs of life at all. Just bare walls, dusty floors, and the faint smell of old paint. One of the officers looked at me like I'd wasted their time. Probably just hearing the neighbors. I wanted to argue, but what could I say? No, officer, it was definitely a whisper right in my ear telling me they're in the walls. They left. The landlord locked up, and that night, the voices came back. Over. The next few weeks they got bolder. Sometimes it was whispers, sometimes laughter, sometimes sobbing. Once I heard what sounded like scratching, nails dragging along the inside of the wall. Another time, I woke to the sound of multiple voices all at once, chanting something low and guttural. I pounded on the wall, screaming for them to shut up. The voices went silent, but a second later, right by my ear, I heard a whisper. We like when you're angry. I called the police again. This time, they didn't even bother to check the vacant unit. They stood in my apartment, listened to the silence, and shrugged. No noise now. Nothing we can do. I tried recording the sounds on my phone. Of course, every time I hit record, the voices stopped. Like they knew. I stopped calling the cops after that. They weren't going to help me. The breaking point came one night in July. I was half asleep when I heard a knock at my door. 3 sharp raps. I stumbled out of bed, checked the peephole. The hallway was empty. I turned to go back to bed. Bang, bang, bang. This time it wasn't the door. It was the wall. The entire wall by my bed shook violently, like fists pounding from the other side. I screamed, grabbed my keys, and bolted out of the apartment. I didn't stop running until I was in my car 2 blocks away. I spent the night in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store. The next morning, exhausted and shaking, I went back. Nothing was out of place. The wall looked untouched, but on the inside of my front door, scratched deep into the wood, were the words, "Don't leave us." I begged the landlord to let me out of my lease. He said no. He offered to move me to another unit in the building, but they were all full. So I stayed, and things got worse. One night, I woke to the sound of my own name being whispered. Over and over. Daniel. 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 I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. It was inside my head. Then I heard a different voice, deeper, colder. Let us in. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was sleep-deprived, maybe I was losing my mind. But I whispered back, "What do you want?" The answer came instantly. "We want your body." I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. I drank coffee until my hands shook, sat up with every light in the apartment blazing, TV on for background noise. But the voices didn't stop. They slipped between the TV dialogue, into the static, into the creaks of the radiator. We're so close now. Almost there. You can't fight us forever. I finally broke and called the police again. I told them everything about the voices, the scratches on the door, the whispers. The dispatcher hesitated, then said, "Sir, maybe you should consider talking to someone, like a professional." She meant a psychiatrist. That's when I realized I was on my own. The final night in apartment 6B is burned into my brain. It was August, hot, sticky, unbearable. I was lying in bed, sweating, when the air in the room suddenly went cold. Not just cooler, cold. Like stepping into a freezer. The voices started louder than ever. A dozen of them, maybe more, overlapping, whispering, laughing, moaning. The walls trembled. The floor shook. My lamp fell off the nightstand and shattered. I bolted upright, heart hammering. And then from the corner of the room I saw it. The wall was bulging inward, like something was pressing against it from the other side. The plaster cracked, dust raining down. A hand pushed through. Gray, thin, with long fingers that ended in sharp points. Another hand followed. Then a face, pale and eyeless, forcing its way through the wall. Its mouth stretched open, wider than it should have been, teeth too many to count, and all the voices screamed at once. "Let us in." I don't remember how I got out. One second I was in the bedroom, the next I was in my car, speeding down the highway, tears streaming down my face. Never went back. I never collected my things. I called the landlord from a payphone the next day and told him he could keep everything. Furniture, clothes, deposit. I didn't care. I just wanted out. A few weeks later, I looked up the building online. I found an old news article from the 1970s. Apartment 6B had been the site of a fire. A man had barricaded himself inside with his wife and children. When firefighters broke down the door, they found him dead by his own hand. The wife and kids were never found. Some neighbors swore they heard screaming through the walls during the fire. Others claimed the family was buried in the building's foundation when it was rebuilt. The article called it a local legend. But I know it wasn't just a legend, because sometimes late at night when I'm lying awake in my new apartment, I still hear them. Faint whispers, just on the edge of hearing, calling my name. I grew up in a rural town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the woods were your backyard and your only entertainment was bonfires, cheap beer, and whatever you could get away with before your parents noticed. By the time I was 20, I'd already decided I wanted out. But before I left, something happened that I'll never forget. Something that convinced me there are things in the world the cops, or anyone, can't protect you from. It started with a camping trip. My best friend Kyle and I used to camp in the woods all the time as kids. But one summer night in 2015, he texted me, "One more trip before you leave for college." "Let's do it, just like old times." I agreed. Nostalgia, I guess. One last hurrah. We packed light, sleeping bags, a tent, a couple flashlights, and a cooler of beer. Drove out to the edge of town where the woods stretched for miles. Found a spot we used to use when we were younger. A clearing with an old fire pit ringed by stones. It felt safe, familiar, but it didn't stay that way for long. The first weird thing happened around midnight. We were sitting by the fire, talking about dumb memories when we both heard it. A whistle. Not a bird, not the wind. An actual whistle. 3 short notes coming from the trees. Kyle froze. "You hear that?" "Yeah," I said. We waited. Then it came again. 3 short notes, this time closer. We both grabbed our flashlights and shined them into the trees. Nothing but shadows and leaves. "Probably some hunter," Kyle muttered, though his voice was shaky. But I knew better. Hunting season was months away, and who the hell hunts at midnight without a lantern or gear? We tried to laugh it off, cranked up some music on Kyle's phone, drank another beer, but both of us kept glancing toward the tree line. Around 1 a.m., the fire was burning low and we decided to crash. We zipped ourselves into the tent, flashlights within reach. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is waking to a sound. Not the whistle this time. Breathing. Right outside the tent. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I held my breath, eyes wide in the dark. Kyle whispered, "You hear that?" Before I could answer, something pressed against the tent wall. A hand. 5 long fingers dragging slowly down the fabric. I nearly screamed. Kyle clamped his hand over my mouth, eyes wide with terror. We sat frozen, listening as the thing circled. The tent. Crunch of footsteps in the grass. Another hand pressing against the thin nylon. Then silence. We didn't move for the rest of the night. At dawn we stumbled out, bleary and terrified. The clearing looked normal, No footprints, no sign of anyone. Except for one thing. On the trunk of a tree just beyond the fire pit, carved deep into the bark, were 3 vertical slashes. Fresh, like claws. We packed up fast. Didn't even finish the beers. On the way back to the car, Kyle kept muttering that it had to be a prank. Someone messing with us. But I couldn't shake the sound of that breathing. That wasn't a prank. We tried to forget about it, but the woods wouldn't let us. A few nights later, Kyle texted me at 3 a.m. It's outside my window. I called him immediately. He picked up, whispering, "It's just standing there, man, tall as hell. I can't see its face, just staring." I told him to call the cops. He did. They showed up 20 minutes later, searched the yard, found nothing. They told Kyle it was probably a deer, but deer don't whistle. After that, it wasn't just Kyle. I started hearing the whistles too. Walking home from my part-time job, I'd hear 3 short notes trailing me from the tree line. Sometimes late at night, I'd glance out my bedroom window and see something tall, pale, half hidden behind the trees. Always watching, always waiting. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my dad's shotgun and drove to Kyle's house. He was sitting on the porch, pale and shaking. "It won't leave me alone," he said. "Every night, it just watches." We decided to go back into the woods, not because we were brave, but because we were desperate. If we confronted it, maybe it would stop. So we went. We hiked back to the clearing, flashlights cutting through the dark. Every crack of a branch made us jump. Around midnight, we heard it. The whistle. 3 short notes. Then, from the other side of the clearing, another whistle. 3 short notes. Our flashlights darted back and forth. Something moved between the trees. Tall, thin, too fast. Kyle raised his light and froze. For just a second, we both saw it. A figure, at least 7 feet tall, skin pale, stretched tight over bones, long arms that nearly reached the ground. Its head cocked unnaturally to the side, eyes gleaming in the beam of the flashlight. And then it was gone. We ran. I don't remember how we made it back to the car. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead, but somehow we got out. We drove straight to the police station, babbling about something in the woods. The officer on duty listened, expressionless, then sighed. "Boys, we get reports like this every summer. Coyotes, bears, shadows. You've been drinking, haven't you?" We swore we hadn't. He didn't care. Filed a suspicious activity report and sent us home. The thing didn't stop. If anything, it got bolder. Kyle started wasting away. Dark, circles under his eyes, jumpy, paranoid. He told me he heard it whispering his name at night. Then one day he was just gone. Didn't show up for work. Didn't answer his phone. His mom called me in a panic. The cops searched the woods, found nothing. His car was still in the driveway. No signs of struggle. Just gone. That was 7 years ago. They never found him. The cops shrugged it off as a runaway case. Said he probably left town, started fresh somewhere else. But I know the truth. The thing in the woods took him, and sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet, I still hear it. 3 short notes. Whistling. From the trees. Waiting for me.